In the last section of the course, we talked all about the basics of the DOM, from adding elements to creating events and everything in between. In this section of the course, we're going to talk about how you can modify the control flow of your program so that it does more than just running from the very top of your file to the bottom of your file. And to get started with that, we're going to be talking about how you can conditionally run code using the if statement. So to get started here, all I have is a pretty empty index.html file, which has a script tag inside of it, and the script tag is just completely empty. And then I have this open with live server, and I just have the dev tools open to the console so that if I write something inside of here, such as console log I, and save, you can see it's going to print out automatically as soon as I save. So first, let's take a look at an example here where we have a variable called user is logged in. And we're going to either set that to true or false depending on if our user is logged in. And if they are logged in, we want to print out console.log user logged in, just like this. So this is what happens if they are logged in. But if they're not logged in, so if this is false, what we want to do instead is print something else out. We'll just say console.log please log in, just like that. So we want to run two different sets of codes depending on if this is true or if this is false. And this is where you use an if statement. An if statement essentially allows you to check something to see if it is true or false, and then what it's going to do is run the code inside the if statement if it is true. So let's take a look at how you would do this. We'll just say if here, so that's how you start an if statement. You write out the word if, all lowercase, and then you're going to need to put in some parentheses here. This is your check, so you put inside of here your variable that you're checking true or false with, and then we're going to put some curly braces, and inside these curly braces is the code that runs if whatever's inside the parentheses is true. So if we, for example, just put the variable true inside here, we put the boolean true, and we just say console.log this is true. Let's get rid of all of this up here, and if we save, you'll see it prints out this is true, because obviously true is true. We change this to false and save, you can see this no longer gets printed out because this is returning false. So this is saying if this is true, run what's inside of it, but this is false, so it's skipping everything inside of the curly braces. And we could put multiple lines inside of here, it really doesn't matter. This is another log, and if this was true, it would run absolutely everything inside of these curly braces. Now if we wanted to run something if it was false instead, what we would do is put in an else. So after you have your if, all you need to do is just come in here after your curly brace, type in the keyword else, and then again put new curly braces. And what this is saying is if what's inside of these parentheses is true, then run everything inside this first set of curly brackets. Otherwise, else, run what's inside of these curly brackets. So we say console.log this is false. And now if we run this, you'll see it prints out this is true. If we change this to false, it's going to say, is this true? It is not. So we're going to run this else condition. As you can see, it says this is false. So we can combine together if with else in order to run different code, whether it's true or false. So now if we go back up to this example up here where we have this user logged in variable, that's what we're going to check. And we're going to say console.log user logged in if they're logged in. Otherwise, we're going to log please log in down here if they're not logged in. And if we run this, you'll see since user is logged in as false, it's saying please log in. We change this to true. We're now getting the code user logged in printed because it's just using that if and checking inside of these parentheses, is this true or false? And it determines what it's going to run, whether it runs the if, whether it runs the else, or if you didn't even have an else here, it would essentially just completely skip all this code and not run anything if this was false, for example. Now you may think that the only thing you can put inside these parentheses is a variable, for example, but you can actually check any JavaScript code inside of here. For example, we could say we want to check 2 plus 2, and we want to see if that is equal to 4. So we're writing out JavaScript code, and we're just saying 2 plus 2. So this is going to evaluate 2 plus 2, and then it's going to compare it to 4, and this entire thing is going to return true or false. And if we save this, you'll see user logged in is being printed out, and here, because 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. We change this to 1, for example, you can see 2 plus 1 is 3, so they're not actually equal, so we don't get any code inside this if being run. Another interesting thing about the way that this if works is, like I said, you can put anything you want inside of here. So we could have, user is logged in, and we could combine that with something like const is on dashboard equals true. We can come in here and say is on dashboard. So we can check if the user is logged in and they're on the dashboard, then we're going to print this out. And if we save, you'll notice nothing gets printed because user is not logged in. If we change both these to true, you can see that is now properly printing this out because true and true returns true. So really you can put any code you want inside of these parentheses, and as long as it evaluates to true, it runs the code inside the first set of curly braces, and if it evaluates to false, and we had an else statement in here, it is going to run whatever is inside of this else. And this else is completely optional. We can have it or not, it really doesn't matter. Now on top of that, if does something interesting when it comes to type coercion, in that it'll convert any value you put inside it to true or false. So if we put, for example, 0 inside of here, and we have an else down here, we'll just say console.log false. And up here, we're just going to change this to log out true. And we can get rid of these variables up here. Now when we save, you can see it's printing out false. It's going down into this else statement here. And the reason for that is because 0, when you convert that to a Boolean, true or false, will always result in false. Same thing with an empty string. An empty string is the same as false, so it's going to be converted to false here. And you can see that in that if we just come down here and say console.log empty string equals false, this is going to do that type conversion. You'll see this prints out true because an empty string is considered false with type coercion. Now this is really important to understand because many times the way that people check to see if something is null or undefined is by just putting a variable inside of here, because null is going to return false and undefined is converted to false. Let's just say that you wanted to check to see if a variable existed, for example, total price. We'll just set it to 100. And what we want to do is we want to see if total price is existing, it's not null and it's not undefined. Many times people will just put total price in here like this. And if we just save this, you'll notice it prints out true, as we expect, because this is not null or undefined. If we have this as null or undefined, as you can see, it's printing out false both times. And that's great for this set of code. But what happens if our total price is 0? Our total price technically exists. It is a value of 0. So we would expect this to run this if statement up here, but this is returning false because 0 is converted to a false value. So I recommend if you're checking for null or undefined, don't just put it inside of here like this where it'll do that type coercion for you. Manually tell your code to check for null or for undefined using the double equals strategy. And all we need to do here is just make sure we say not equal to null, because if the total price exists, then we want to run true. And now when we save, you see we get true with a value of 0. But if this is null or undefined, we're going to get false printed out, which is exactly what we want. That's a trap a lot of people run into. So I recommend if you're ever checking for null or undefined, make sure to explicitly do the check instead of using the implicit conversions from JavaScript, because that can just make things confusing. Now, last thing I want to talk about with if and else is if you need to do multiple if statements chained together. So let's do this same example with total price. We'll set it equal to 100. In our first check here, all we're going to do is check to see if total price is null, and we'll just print out there is no total price. Then what we want to do is we want to check to see if our total price is actually greater than a certain value. For example, if it's greater than 10. So what we need to do is combine together our if to use an else if. And the way an else ifs works is you type in the word else, and then you just type in the word if. So you combine together your else statement, which says if this set of parentheses is false, then it runs this else. And since we put an if after it, we can actually set another set of parentheses here with a new condition. So we can say total price is greater than 10. Well, actually, let's just say less than 10. Just like that. Put in our curly brackets, and now we can do something else. We'll say console.log, this is pretty cheap. And then we can combine this again. We'll say another else if the total price is less than 50. What we can do inside of here is say console.log, this is not too bad. And then we can even combine this together with a final else, where we're just going to say console.log, this is expensive. Now if we save, you can see it says this is expensive because this is going through our ifs one by one. It says, is the total price null? Okay, it's not. So we're going to go to the next one. It says, is our total price less than 10? Nope. Down to the next one. Is our total price less than 50? Nope. Then it goes all the way down to this final else with has no condition. So it just prints this out. If this, for example, was null, you can see it says there is no total price, which is this first one, because it gets to this first if statement, checks it, sees, okay, this is null, there's a problem here, this is true, so we're going to print this out. If this, for example, instead was 30, and we save, you can see what happens as it goes through. Okay, it's not equal to null, good. It's not less than 10, okay. Now we get down to here and it's less than 50, so it says this is not too bad, as you can see over here. And finally, if we had a cheap price, for example, 5, and we save, you see this says this is pretty cheap. And you may immediately be thinking there's a problem. Why doesn't it print out both of these? Because technically 5 is less than 10 and it's less than 50. And the reason for that is when you have a set of ifs that are combined together with these else if statements, only one of them can ever run. As soon as you run one of these conditions, it skips all the way to the bottom down here. So it'll only ever run one condition inside of this if, and it goes from top to bottom. So as you can see here, total price equal to null, that is false. So we go to the next one. Is the total price less than 10? Yes. So it runs this log right here. It never gets a chance to run this, less than 50 check because it's already run the code inside of this if. And as soon as it runs code inside of one of these conditions, it skips down all the way to the very bottom and leaves the if condition. So you can only ever run one of the conditions inside of an if statement, and that's really important to understand. If that wasn't true, we would need to do extra logic to make sure it doesn't run both of these and only ever ran one. But since ifs automatically do that for us, we don't have to worry about that. If instead what we wanted to do was actually run each one of these instead of only running one of them, and we wanted to run all of them that it was equal to, what we would need to do instead of using else ifs is we would just use multiple if statements. So for example, we could do this. We get rid of this code down here. Now we have 3 if statements, and all of these if statements are completely separate from one another. They don't impact each other at all. So now when I save this, you'll see it prints out this is pretty cheap and this is not too bad because it's less than 10. So it satisfied everything inside of this if block. It goes down to this brand new, completely separate if block, and it says, okay, is our price less than 50? That's also true, so it's going to print this out. So if you wanted to run and do multiple checks where it doesn't exit out prematurely, you need to make sure you have multiple individual if statements. While if you wanted that premature exit like we had before, where it can only run one of these, you need to make sure you use the else if syntax, which is just the keyword else, followed by a space, followed by the keyword if. So now it's your turn to try this out. What I want you to do is create a variable that contains an array, and you can put as many elements as you want inside of this array. Then what I want you to do is using an if statement with else if blocks. So you're going to use that else if syntax. I want you to check the length of the array. So this is what you're going to do. If the array is empty, if it is empty, print out empty. If it has less than 5 elements, print out small. If it has less than 10 elements, print out medium. Otherwise, print out large. So essentially, you're just going to create a variable that's an array. You can put as many elements as you want inside of it. And then you're going to create an if statement that checks the length of the array to see if it's either empty, has less than 5 elements, less than 10 elements, or every other case in there. So pause the video here, give yourself a chance to take a look at this and see what you can do. So hopefully you've taken a chance to do this. First thing we need to do is create that variable that contains an array. So we're just going to call this a, and it's equal to an array. For now, we're just going to have an empty array. Then what I want to do is come down here with an if statement. We can say if a.length is equal to 0, then we know that we have an empty array. So what we can do is we can print out empty, just like that. And if we save this, you can see it prints out empty because right now we have an empty array. We add an element, and now it's no longer empty. So far we've done exactly what we need to for this first step up here. Next step is we want to check to see if it has less than 5 elements. So what we're going to do is say else if a.length is less than 5. Now we can come down here and say console.log small. So now if we save, we get empty being printed out because our length is equal to 0, and that's getting our first check, and then it's exiting out of the rest of our if statement. Next thing we have down here is our check for less than 5. So if we put an element inside of here, you see it'll print out small because our array is longer than a length of 0 because there's one element in it, and it's less than 5, so it's going to follow this condition here. Next, we're going to check to see if it's medium size, so a.length is less than 10. That's going to console.log out medium, just like that. And let's just test that. We save, we still get small being printed here. And if we just put a bunch of elements inside of here so that it's more than 5 but less than 10, and save, you can see it prints out medium. Finally, this otherwise keyword essentially means else. So else, if none of those conditions are true, then we're just going to print out large. And now what we can do is we can just add a bunch of elements into here. There we go. And if we save, you can see it prints out large because we now have more than 10 elements in our array. And as we chop this down, You can see it prints out medium, chop it down a little further, prints out small, and if we go all the way to empty, it'll print out empty. So that's how you would do this small little if check here. One last important thing to understand about if statements is these work just like functions when it comes to scopes. Remember, pretty much anytime you see a set of curly braces, that's going to be a scope. So each one of these if statements is its own individual scope. So if I create a variable inside of here, let's just call this L is equal to 10. This is only available inside of this set of curly braces. I can't use L down here. I can't say, L is now equal to 20. This is not going to work because there's no L inside of this scope here because the L is only available inside this inner scope. And if I tried to, for example, console.log L, and I just gave my array enough elements inside of it to fall into this category here, and I save, you're going to notice we get an error because L is not defined. Go over here, you can see reference error, L is not defined, and that's because they're in their own scope. So this scope of this if up here does not have access to the scope down here, and vice versa. So remember, when you see these curly braces like that, you have to remember that this is an individual scope. So treat this if statement here as if it was a function, and everything inside of it is only inside of its own scope, and it's only available inside of that set of curly braces and not outside of it. And that's pretty much everything there is to this if syntax. You're going to see tons of this as we write programs because pretty much every program is full of logical things such as if this, then do that, otherwise do this. That's pretty much the basis of most programs. In the next video, I'm going to show you a more compact way to write an if statement, even though it's something that I recommend that you don't generally do, but you're probably going to see it, so it's important to understand how it works.